Ladies and gentlemen, well, there's a lot of news when it comes to Wuwa's anniversary, and some of the biggest news of all isn't related to, necessarily the rewards, but all of the different banners that you're going to be able to pull on. And let me just say that this anniversary has probably the most banners we'll ever see in Wuthering Waves, at least until the next one. And that's because A, they have Zani, who's going to be running in Phase 1, and then they're going to have Ciaccona, who's going to be running in Phase 2. And so some things you should just keep in mind when it comes to these characters is that, one, Zani is going to be really focused on Spectral Frazzle and interacting with Spectral Frazzle. We don't have the full details of her kit yet, but that's just, a bit of a clue of what she does. And when it comes to Ciaccona, well, she's going to be a character that both A, applies Spectral Frazzle, and B, applies Arrow Erosion, and then has some very cool things built into her kit. That Spectral Frazzle Arrow Erosion application is going to be on her Resonance Liberation over here. We did see a clip of that in the live stream. She can alternate between the two forms, and then she does some of that stuff off field. And so that's just the gist of what those two characters are doing. And so if you have units like Phoebe, definitely keep Zani top of mind, or if you want to make use of Spectral Rover for their Frazzle application stacks, do keep them in mind as well. And then for Ciaccona, obviously, right, if you want to make use of Arrow Rover, or even maybe build a support for Zani or Phoebe, she's somebody that you can think about too. And so with that, that's just going to be our brief overview of the pull value of these units. As this is going to be a really early guide, a really early overview, we'll dive more into the value of these units once their official kit is released. So be on the lookout for that. Now it's on for the main focus of the day, and we're going to be moving past their weapons as well because, well, we don't know anything about them yet. The main focus of today is going to be focused on the anniversary convenes. And let me just be a little bit honest when I say that this is probably one of the best benefits that Kuro could have given to the player base. They are essentially running every single character that has ever been released in Wuthering Waves across these two phases. They're having kind of like the first set of units over here with a lot of the 1.0 ones and Phoebe in Phase 1. And then in Phase 2, right, they're going to have units like Jinhsi, Xiangli, Carlotta, Roccia, and Brant. The only characters that they aren't running are the ones that ran in version 2.2. The Shorekeepers, the Camellias, as well as the Cantarellas, because, well, they were just released in the prior patch. And so those are the only units, and those are the only weapons that aren't going to be available in this patch. And so with that, what I wanted to do was actually break down the value of all of these units in the current state of the meta, the value of all these units, their weapons, and help you decide who you want to dedicate some of your resources towards if it isn't going to be those two new characters that we talked about, or if you're willing to do things, right, like maybe spend a little bit, go and approach those top-up banners, or you're just looking for a place, right, in case you get in early, to spend the 37 plus pulls you're going to be getting, 44 with the corals across the patch. And so with that, we're just going to go in kind of like chronological order from what we're seeing in Phase 1. We're going to go over all the weapons as well, and then we're going to move on ahead into Phase 2. So let's go ahead, let's get right on into it, and start off with none other than Jiyan. I'm going to be honest here. Jiyan at this point in the game is still a very, very, very powerful character. He is a unit that is able to easily clear the TOA. He's a unit that has gotten indirectly buffed with the add of the Nightmare Gorilla Echo. He's gotten indirect buffs as well. And let's be honest here, with the release of characters like Shorekeeper to the roster, he's gotten a lot stronger, and there's also potential for further synergy in the future when he's being used with units like, let's just be honest here, Arrow Rover, and some of the stuff, especially with their weapon Blood Pack's Pledge, that is going to get more and more refinement ranks as time goes on. Unfortunately, he really only has one best in slot team at the moment that performs exceedingly well in combination with Mortefi, but let's be honest here, right? A lot of people do have Mortefi at S6 considering how many banners he's been on, and the character is, right, within his 1.0 team with Mortefi, and then a support like Shorekeeper or Verena, he still clears the TOA. He's a best in slot pick for Whimpering Wastes, and the only content in the game that I honestly feel like he struggles in is certain hologram bosses, where, camera angles and simply being a melee character is a bit of a weakness in content like that. But when it comes to basically every other endgame mode, he's pretty good. Unfortunately, he's liberation reliant, and so in the overworld, a little bit rough to use. When it comes to his weapon, Verdant Summit, unfortunately, Jiyan does feel like one of the more weapon-reliant characters in the game, and that's because the standard 5-star weapon is just not very good. We'll just take a look at that. The standard 5-star weapon is Lustrous Razor, which gives ER, which is good for Jiyan, but when the Residence skill is released, it gives a liberation damage bonus that stacks up. Jiyan can't use this liberation damage bonus at all. He does absolutely no Resonance liberation damage, and so that means that you kind of do feel the need to have a limited weapon on him if you want to reach his potential, because Lustrous Razor also doesn't have a critical stat. It gives only attack. And so having one of these limited weapons, Age of Harvest from Jinhsi or Verdant Summit, feels a lot better than all of the other options. And when you do have this, and when you do build him, right, you give him some good echoes, you give him some high investment, at least 120 to 130% ER. Yeah, this dude is going to absolutely clean up basically everything in the game. He's a 1.0 character, but he's still good. And last time he ran was in 1.3. And that was quite a while ago for most players, so do keep that in mind. He's definitely somebody that you can get a lot of value out of, and considering that his best support, or his best sub DPS is a 4-star unit, and he doesn't really have a 5-star premium option yet, he's not really an expensive unit to build either, as long as you're willing to get his weapon. You don't feel like you need a Yinlin like Xiangli Yao does, and you don't feel like you need a Phoebe like Zani will want. And so, yeah, his best team, his premium team, is with a 4-star unit, and that makes him inherently a bit more cheap compared to others. All right, time to move on. We got Yinlin, and we have String Master. And fortunately, I have both of those weapons, so it's going to be pretty easy for me to talk about some stuff over here. Yinlin is, unfortunately, in my opinion, not really that strong of a character. She kind of has a couple of issues just from the perspective of her rotation feels really clunky, and she always feels like she is, you know, not really dealing as much damage as maybe some other sub DPSs, as some other units. And while her buffs are good, she gives a nice little Resonance Liberation and Electro Damage amp. Her team with Xiangli Yao doesn't actually deal that much damage. And Xiangli Yao has other options he can use. He can run dual DPS with a unit like Changli, or he can run like dual DPS with any other unit in the game. But when it comes to Yinlin and her other options, she kind of only has like Zhangli or Calcharo. And if you're only willing to pull her and then not maybe a unit like Zhangli, well, I don't feel like you're going to get that much out of her, especially now that Jinhsi, who Yinlin previously supported in the past with her coordinated attacks, now that Jinhsi has Cantarella and Zhezhi to use as partners, it's pretty safe to say that Yinlin is probably one of the worst units that can go with Jinhsi right now in terms of coordinated attackers. Cantarella and Zhezhi are just better than Yinlin in pretty much every single way for supporting Jinhsi, and so that means Yinlin's only a best-in-slot support for one unit who can just pair up with other DPS characters, or even like a unit like Yang Yang, and still get some good results out of it. So I would just say Yinlin, not too high value. But you want to know what is high value? It's going to be Yinlin's weapon. String Master is, without a doubt, probably the best general weapon in the game. The fact of the matter is that String Master gives massive crit, 36%, a general attribute damage bonus, and then a simple stacking effect that gives you 12% attack up to 2 times, as long as you deal resonance skill damage. And while Yinlin is able to be one of the only characters that can maintain full uptime on it, especially its off-field bonus, well, I'm gonna be real here, right? Every character in the game feels like they can get at least some benefit out of this attack boost, even if they're not constantly refreshing it. This weapon is good on Cantarella, it's good on Phoebe, it's good on Zhezhi, it's good on Yinlin, it's good on Encore, and it becomes a budget option that essentially, right, if you pull this one weapon, you now have a weapon for every other Rectifier user in the game that isn't a support, and you give the variation over to them. This weapon is essentially, you can use it for basically everybody, and that means that this is generally just one of like the best value pulls you can make in the game. I pulled 1 copy of it, actually genuinely thinking about pulling 2, just with how powerful it is. Yeah, it is super high value. I would really recommend it. If you wanted it, I would really recommend it. All right, let's move on to the next unit. We got Zhezhi. And so this is the thing, right? Zhezhi is a good unit. Zhezhi is a strong unit. She has 2 best-in-slot partners with both Jinhsi as well as Carlotta, right? She heavily supports these 2 units. She feels like, in a lot of ways, almost a must-pull if you're going to be using Carlotta. And with Jinhsi or with Carlotta and Zhezhi running at the same time, in version 2.0, there might be a lot of players who have missed out on using Zhezhi. And let's be honest here, right? Zhezhi is an incredibly easy unit to use. She has, some people are saying she has a lot of field time. I personally don't think she does. And she has amazing buffs, like being able to restore resonance energy. This is basically Yang Yang's outro skill, so she kind of just has somebody's outro skill built into her kit. And obviously, she gives that big boost to Glacio and resonance skill damage that makes her amazing with Carlotta. That ER helps a ton too. And the thing is, Zhezhi's super easy to use. She has a lot of fluidity if you do things like her jump cancels. I'll just show you really quickly what that tech looks like. Let's just use the Morning Ikes as a punching bag over here. She has this jump cancel tech over here where you can like speed up how fast she's like doing things and then immediately get through her rotation, which is pretty neat. It's a pretty neat thing that she's able to use combat. And, you know, you can look up videos on how to do that. You basically just spam jump as you're spamming the skill. And she's able to shorten her rotation time. It's not a complicated thing to do. And it makes her feel a lot more fluid, relatively. And the thing is, when it comes to her weapon, well, you can just use String Master on her and get some very, very, very good results. Nothing too crazy about it. That's why I recommended pulling this weapon before. But if you are thinking about, you know, getting super sweaty with her and pulling her signature, I don't recommend it. Because this weapon kind of only works for Zhezhi. This weapon only works for Zhezhi. It increases attack by 12%, and then using a resonance skill gives you a 12% basic attack damage boost, and there's not a lot of units in the game that want basic attack damage. This is usable on Cantarella, and it's usable on Encore, but it's kind of just either exactly the same or worse than String Master on those units. And so you could just pull String Master instead, slot Zhezhi and Yinlin and Cantarella and Encore, or you could pull Rime-Draped Sprouts and only be able to slot Encore and Cantarella and Zhezhi. While this one basically lets you use 2 more characters without needing to pull anything. This weapon on Phoebe and Yinlin is not really that good at all. It's really just not that good. I would just say stick with String Master if you are going to pull Zhezhi. And overall, this is probably one of the worst signatures in the game, just because of all the other options there are available for her. Now, let's move on to the next unit. That is going to be Xiangli Yao. I'm going to be real here, right? Everyone got a copy of Xiangli Yao for free if they're playing in version 1.2, and he is a strong unit. He is a great unit, right? He has a lot of flexibility, but one thing that we have to be honest about when it comes to Xiangli is that he doesn't really have the same amount of raw damage in his hypercarry teams relative to other units. And when used in a dual DPS team, right, like with a character like Changli, he actually has a lot more potential and he has a lot better results. Unfortunately, right, when you're using him with a character like Yinlin, you're just not really dealing as much damage as you could be, because Xiangli's multipliers simply aren't as high as other units, and if you're looking for more flexibility, he is going to be a guy that's really good. And this is the thing, right? He also has a time slowdown on his Resonance Liberation, basically every time he uses one of these Law of Rains hypercubes, and that is a good bit of like quality of life in the combat that, you know, you'll be able to use and leverage across your clears. If you compare him to a character like Carlotta, Camellia, Jinhsi, or even like Jiyan in terms of like raw DPS, I'm quite certain that he simply just does less than all of them. And he still needs Yinlin, a premium 5-star support, to be dealing less damage than all those other units, even, you know, with all this backing. And so I would say if you're looking for comfort and you're looking for flexibility, he's a great pick. But if you're looking for like raw damage performance, I don't think you're going to get that much value out of him. And that's kind of like amplified by the fact that his signature weapon, Verity's Handle, is kind of specific in that it only does Resonance Liberation as its boost. And so Xiangli without this weapon does feel a little bit bad. If you have the battle pass, then Stone Art is a good alternative. But if you're using just like the basic 5-star standard weapon, I'm going to be real here. The standard 5-star gauntlet is not that good on him because it only busts basic attack damage and most of his damage is Resonance Liberation. It's kind of like the same situation with Jiyan that we were talking about before. And like Rossia's weapon is completely dog shit useless on him as well. So you can think about him. I would just say that with all the new characters that have been released and all the different roles that are, you know, that are being played, he kind of requires Yinlin to reach his hypercarry potential, and then his hypercarry potential isn't that high. But if you're planning to use him for dual DPS, I do think you'll get a lot of great results out of him. So that's going to be Xiangli. Now let's move on to, I think, really the highlight of the first half banners. and that's going to be Phoebe. And so based off the footage that I just showed you before in the live stream, right, where we were talking about Zani, it's very clear that Zani is going to rely on Spectral Frazzle to deal a meaningful amount of her damage. Zani is going to rely on Spectral Frazzle to deal a meaningful amount of her damage. And Phoebe is the Spectral Frazzle unit. When she's in her confession state, her heavy attacks, which she can use 2 of, will apply 5 stacks, her liberation will apply 8, and her outro skill is also going to amplify the damage of Spectral Frazzle by 100%. 100%. And this is the thing, ladies and gentlemen. Her weapon as well will give an additional 30% amplification on the Frazzle. And Zani is going to be a unit that simply deals all the Spectral Frazzle damage at once. And so essentially, Zani will allow Phoebe to turn into almost like a nuke in a sense. And there's going to be a ton of synergy between the two characters. And so if you're somebody that doesn't own Phoebe and you want to pull Zani and you want Zani to be as strong as possible, well, that's going to be kind of like the use case to be pulling Phoebe over here. However, if you don't want to pull Zani, Phoebe is still a very good DPS when paired with Spectral Rover. Phoebe is still a great DPS when paired with Spectral Rover. And when it comes to other options for weapons, she's great with String Master. She's actually decent with the standard rectifier that boosts basic attack damage. If you do have Ocean's Gift, it's also a great weapon to use with Spectral Frazzle if you're going to be using Phoebe as a bit more of a DPS unit. And so, yeah, Phoebe on a DPS set like Eternal Radiance, as well as a unit like, well, let's just be honest here, right? The very free Spectral Rover. She's going to be able to clear pretty much all the content in the game that is not Spectral resistant. And so even if you're not pulling her for Zani, you'll still get good results out of her. But if you are pulling her for Zani, that'll be the best way to get good results out of Zani. So yeah, that's that. Let's go ahead and move on to Phase 2. And the first character that we're going to be talking about in Phase 2 is, of course, Jinhsi. And I'm going to be real here, right? Jinhsi is a good unit. She's very strong. She has some loose stat requirements where she doesn't actually need, in my opinion, any ER to still get good rotations going. And this is the thing, right? She's still strong. She has a lot of room for complexity where you can play her very, very, very easily. And she has 3 supports or 3 sub DPS characters that can, you know, one of them is not that good, but then 2 of them are very good for her. She has Yinlin just for the coordinated attacks. She also has, well, Cantarella, who has a shit ton of coordinated attacks, and, most importantly, a resonance skill damage buff. You have Zhezhi as well, who's going to provide the same exact resonance skill damage buff, be a bit more single target oriented, and then also have that resonance energy buff so that Jinhsi can, you know, cast her liberation more. So Jinhsi actually has 3 support options in the game, and thankfully, the 2 coordinated attackers also buff resonance skill, and that's kind of like most of her damage. That's kind of just like most of her damage is resonance skill damage. So at this point, if you have a unit like Cantarella, if you have a unit like Zhezhi, and you don't have Jinhsi yet, she'll be a good pick. You'll get a lot of use out of her. But do keep in mind that you will be double dipping in spectral damage. And I'm going to be honest here, I don't think double dipping in a certain type of damage, if you don't have other elements or attributes covered, I don't think that's a great idea. And so that means if you have Phoebe and you're using her as a DPS, or you want Zani, well, Jinhsi might not be the best pick. You might want quite literally any of these other characters because, you know, units like Brant will be fusion, units like Xiangli are fusion, and units like Carlotta will be glacial, right? And so if you already have a spectral DPS like Phoebe on Phase 1 or Zani, I can't really recommend you pull Jinhsi if you don't have any of these other elements covered. When it comes to Jinhsi's weapon options, of course, her best in slot is going to be Age of Harvest, which is going to give a massive 48% skill damage bonus if you do have it. But Jinhsi is kind of like, she does do enough damage to the point where an option like Verdant Summit is okay, and Jinhsi actually does deal liberation damage. And so that means even a broad blade like Lustrous Razor can still be usable. It can still be usable, but it definitely won't be as good as her signature. So she actually is less signature reliant than Jiyan at the end of the day. But you really want one of these 3 things, because the 4-star options, they're just not very good on her. They're just not very good on her. So that's going to be the Jinhsi weapon banner, as well as Jinhsi herself. Let's go ahead and let's now move on to Changli. Let's talk about Changli later, because I need to talk about her with the last unit on the banner, Brant. We'll be talking about these 2 together, because you'll see why. Let's just go ahead and move on to Carlotta for now. So I'm going to be real here. Carlotta is the best unit in the game for one task: killing bosses and clearing things in the TOA. Against a low number of targets, and especially when paired with a unit like Zhezhi, who you might be getting in Phase 1 or who you might already have, Zhezhi and Carlotta are probably the best duo in the game to clear bosses in the TOA. She is so incredibly strong, and with Zhezhi on her side, Zhezhi buffs all the damage types that Carlotta does, Glacial and Resonance skill, and she buffs them in a very, very strong way. And with this Resonance energy that Zhezhi provides, Carlotta is basically able to Liberation on cooldown and just deal massive amounts of damage. She also has built-in CC on her kit, where she can go ahead and use something like Dispersion, and then proceed to, right, make the enemy a lot more easy to tackle. She's also probably the easiest unit in the game. I think that with this character releasing in 2.0, she's basically like a crutch for every single new player, or everybody with, let's just be honest here, like a skill issue that might prevent them from using other units. She's also, with an Echo build that has maybe like 125 plus ER, she also works perfectly fine with a Tao Chi. And so even if you don't have Zhezhi, as long as you're willing to grind Carlotta's echoes a decent amount, well, you just be able to use her with Tao Chi, put Tao Chi on a Discord, and then like Moonlit Clouds as the echo set, and then just, you don't even need to like level her. Like, this is what my Tao Chi skill tree looks like, and I've been using this combo to clear endgame content on many accounts. Not mine, because I have Zhezhi, but if you don't have Zhezhi, she'll do just fine, because Carlotta does enough damage for the both of them. Don't worry. Carlotta does, in fact, do enough damage for both of them combined. Yeah, so that'll be that. All right, so now that we covered Carlotta, let's go ahead and let's get on into her weapon. The Last Dance is kind of a little bit specific while also being pretty general. Last Dance is good because it gives a massive 72% crit damage. It also gives a pretty fat attack bonus and then a Resonance skill damage bonus of 48%. The thing is, this is short, and so you have to really time it well if you are using it in combat, but it is probably one of the best general weapon options in the game because Static Mist is the only other 5-star pistol, and Static Mist is a support weapon. And so what that means is Carlotta's weapon, which buffs Resonance skill, which a lot of other pistol users do or deal, it's the only like DPS oriented 5-star weapon in the game. The only one. And every pistol user will deal some type of Resonance skill damage bonus, and so it's actually the best general 5-star in the class. And as more get added, right, we'll probably see Ciaccona's is the second limited 5-star pistol that's coming up. Maybe that'll be pretty decent as well. So do keep that in mind. It's a pretty decent pick, but Carlotta performs just fine if she's going to be using Static Mist, because that crit stat and the ER, even if you don't have a damage bonus, is enough for you to clear any content in the game. Carlotta's pistol is not needed. It's kind of just only if you want to hit higher damage numbers, and she's actually easier to build on Static Mist because of that built-in ER. And I've done Static Mist Carlotta with Tao Chi. That built-in ER makes it a lot easier to manage the substats, and we've been clearing all the content on that whenever it's possible. So that'll be that. Now, let's move on to the next unit, and that's going to be Roccia. This unit is, in my opinion, kind of unnecessary. I would only pull this unit if you're looking to support Camellia, only if you're trying to optimize Camellia's damage like crazy, and it should be an and if you're struggling in Weewa. I'm gonna be honest here, Weewa's most recent reset is so easy, or not really easy, but it's like balanced where you don't necessarily need a grouper to clear as long as you're able to rotate well. And the only reason to have a grouper in Weewa at the moment is if you are kind of bungling your rotations and you're allowing the enemies to not get like staggered in the right way, and you're kind of just, you know, messing up a little bit. That is essentially what Roccia is for. She's kind of like a saver for your Weewa clears if you kind of just completely mess up your rotation. This is because A, she has big buffs for Camellia with that havoc damage amplification and the basic attack damage amplification, and she also provides up to 200% attack or 200 attack to the team based off her crit rate if she has around 70%. But the thing is, she's super hard to build. She's extremely expensive to build when it comes to maximizing her echo substats because she needs 130% ER, she needs over 70% crit rate, and she also is going to need a 5-star weapon to make building and balancing her crit rate to even benefit from her liberation like manageable. And if you do use her with Shorekeeper, it is easier to achieve that, but you could just be doing everything that she does on a much smaller budget just by using Sanhua. Because Sanhua at S6 is already going to give you a 20% attack boost, which is basically the same as that 200 from Roccia's Liberation, with no need for investment beyond just, you know, getting copies of a 4-star unit. And, well, Sanhua is also a 4-star unit. And then her total buff when it comes to the outro skill, it's only 7% lower amp than Roccia's. And Sanhua rotates a lot faster. And so the end result is kind of just, the real advantage for pulling Roccia in the past was being able to use her in Whimpering Waste. But Whimpering Waste has now not really needed her in its most recent reset. She's not really needed for Weewa to get good clears that will get you 4.5k. And so this unit, in my opinion, with Whimpering Waves becoming more accessible to more teams, it has lowered the value of this unit tremendously. And honestly, I think that's pretty good for the game as a whole, where it doesn't feel like she trivializes the game mode and makes it too easy. She's kind of just, now that Weewa is becoming more accessible, her value has gone down tremendously. And so I would just say, don't feel bad about skipping this unit. I pulled her, so you don't have to. And that'll be that. Her weapon as well, Tragic Comedy, is one of, it's literally a tragic comedy. That's because it increases attack by 12%, and then every time an intro skill or basic attack is used, her heavy attack damage was increases by 48%. And no gauntlet user in the game currently does heavy attack damage. None of them. Not a single one of them. The only one that might is Zani. That is the only one that might. And so maybe you take a look at Zani's kit. Zani is going to be phase 1. Roccia is going to be phase 2. And then maybe you can decide to pull on Rocia's weapon for Zani as well. But if that's the case, you could also just pull on Zani's weapon because you're going to be pulling a new 5-star anyways. So, yeah, that's kind of just it. And it only being 3 seconds is super fucking short. So it is what it is. You can do whatever you want with this. I just don't think this weapon is very good. I think this weapon is one of the worst in the game. Super specific and just not good on anybody except Roccia. All right, now it's time for the elephant in the room. It's going to be the Brant and the Changli banner. I'm going to be real. I think Brant is a great unit to pull by himself if you're willing to invest the resources into giving him around 260 plus ER. And if you're willing to pull his signature. If you're not willing to do that, I feel like Brant is a little bit limited in what he can do. If you're not willing to reach 250% ER and not pull his sig, you'll put him on something like Emerald of Genesis, or maybe even Blood Pack's Pledge if you really want. You'll be putting him on Emerald of Genesis and then on the Molten Rift set instead of his signature set, Tie-Breaking Courage, right? You'll pull him on like Molten Rift instead. If you do that, Brant can only be played as a hyper carry. He can't be played as the support that you might be pulling him to be, where he provides healing and shielding, all of that stuff on a regular basis. It's kind of just, you're going to put him in a hyper carry role. And if that's what Brant is on, Molten Rift with Emerald of Genesis, he's kind of just worse. He's just worse than every other unit in the game when it comes to being that hyper carry. However, when you do pull his signature, and you get him a good build, he does pretty much everything. He does huge nukes, decent sustained damage, healing, and shielding, as well as really, really fast concerto generation to be able to provide his buff of 20% fusion damage and 25% skill damage. He's also one of the best units to quick swap with in the game, because if you swapped him in the air, he'll be fine. If you go ahead and you swapped him on the ground, he can just press his skill and then end up in the air, and he excels in air attacks as a whole. And when it comes to his weapon, well, it gives him pretty much everything he needs. 77% ER, it gives him a massive, or not really a massive, gives him 8% crit rate, and then buffs to basic attack damage, which he really, really, really likes, because he's mostly a basic attack damage character, and his nuke at the end of the day deals an absurd amount of fucking damage. Let's just go ahead and see how much damage that nuke is. That nuke is around 1.322k, and that's pretty damn good. That's pretty damn good. And the thing is, Brant and Changli are being discussed together over here for one simple reason. I don't feel like Changli feels like a very good unit to play and use unless you're willing to pull Brant and use them alongside each other. The reason for that is, while Changli can be used with a unit like Xiangli Yao, this is kind of like the only other combo that she has where she's like not just like an objectively worse option than everybody else. And when Changli and Brant are together, these two pair up in such a like fluid way where she feels like a completely new unit if Brant is on your account. So that's that. That's what it is. I don't recommend pulling her just by herself. I don't recommend just pulling her without a partner to use her with. She doesn't really have any other alternatives other than being with a dual DPS, and is a little bit rough. And especially with this outro skill of hers only being 10 seconds, being shorter than other units, and not being as high value as other sub DPSs, she kind of really only fulfills the dual DPS role. And unfortunately, it makes her a rough pick when she doesn't have a teammate to work directly with her. Her signature, on the other hand, is actually really high value. Her signature is super flexible because it buffs resonant skill damage. It stacks up in this kind of complicated system. It gives attack and also a whopping huge amount of crit damage. This weapon is actually best in slot for Spectral Rover and Havoc Rover. And so I would actually recommend if you don't want to pull Xiangli, but you want to make your rovers really strong, you could just pull Blazing Brilliance or the other members of your account. This is actually the best in slot weapon for a lot of units. Like Sanhua, like Yang, all of those. It is like a better option for them than stuff like Emerald of Genesis, 1,000,000%. And so, yeah, it's also best in slot for Dan Jin. So, if anything, I would say Blazing Brilliance for most players, unless you're willing to play super sweaty with Xiangli and you're willing to pair up with other units, Blazing Brilliance might actually be a better option than Xiangli itself. But if you have Brant, Xiangli's a great pick. When it comes to Xiangli's weapon options, though, as a whole, outside of Blazing Brilliance, I'm going to be real here. Xiangli's also really good on Emerald to Genesis because she casts Resident skills multiple times. She's able to stack up this effect. There's no real need to pull Xiangli's signature if you have this and you're trying to get baseline results. But if you do have it, well, this weapon is actually going to be better most of the time on other units than her. Shockingly enough, because of the crazy stat profile it provides. That crit damage allows units like Spectro Rover, for example, to run double crit and reach crazy values like this in their clears, as well as Havoc Rover too, because of their built-in crit that they have in their skill tree or their Sonata set, right? From maybe something like Eternal Radiance. So that's going to be every single banner and every single weapon that's going to be available in the anniversary. Hopefully, this has given you some insight on the value of all those different things that you're going to be able to pull. Do keep in mind, right, that it is going to be broken up across 2 phases, so you can't, you know, pull Jinhsi or pull Xiangli right off the rip. You're going to have to wait until the next half of the patch. And do keep in mind that these units are going to be disappearing as well in the second half to make room for the other ones. But most of the anniversary rewards are going to be front-loaded, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. So with that, let me know what you all think. Peace.